Good morning to the Hardy crew that got to bed at a reasonable hour, I think, and congratulations for being here at 9 a.m. My name's Jennifer Hauge. I'm a Legislative Affairs Manager for the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and I just want to welcome you to day 2 of the conference, which again is sponsored by my employer, Animal Legal Defense Fund, the Center for Animal Law Studies at Lewis and Clark Law School, and Lewis and Clark Animal Legal Defense Fund Student Chapter. That's a lot of words. If you didn't get upstairs yesterday, I just wanted to make an announcement that there's some great sponsor booths up there. There's swag from the event, there's law review journals, there's just things of interest. There's 2 sets of stairs so you can kind of make a loop. Just check it out before you leave. And I want to quickly introduce our speakers for this panel so that we can get straight to the content and leave time for questions, because I know from yesterday's experience they've all been so jam-packed it's hard for you to have a chance to participate, and we want to give you as much opportunity to do that. So in the order they'll be speaking, first is Brian Posewitz, Director of Humane Voters Oregon. Brian is a founding board member and director of Humane Voters Oregon. He is an attorney by trade who now works as a staff attorney for Water Watch of Oregon, which is a local river conservation organization. In addition to serving on the board of Humane Voters Oregon, Brian manages the day-to-day administration of the organization as well. And he has also volunteered with other organizations over the years to help advocate for animal welfare. He lives with his rescue dog here in Portland. Next up is Danielle Moser, Wildlife Program Coordinator for Oregon Wild. Danielle is a lifelong conservationist, having dedicated her entire professional career to being an advocate for wildlife and the wild places they call home. While attending Michigan State University for her degree in political science, she ran her first successful environmental campaign, which sparked her fire for organizing, advocacy, and action. After several years of working for various conservation organizations, she decided to serve in the Peace Corps and was placed in Tanzania as an environment volunteer. She is now the Wildlife Program Coordinator for Oregon Wild and also resides here in Portland. And finally, we'll have Diana Urban, a retired Connecticut State Representative and Chair of the Committee on Children, along with being founder and president of Protecting Kids and Pets Partnership. Diana retired just last year after 18 years in the Connecticut General Assembly. Well known for her work linking animal cruelty to future violent behavior, Diana authored the first of its kind in the nation law that allows judges to appoint lawyers pro bono and supervise law students in court to represent dogs and cats in cases of egregious abuse. And we're working together to take that program to other states as well. Known as Desmond's Law, she is now actively supporting efforts to pass similar legislation in other states, like I just said. During her tenure, she also successfully pushed laws on dissection choice, cross-reporting of abuse and neglect between government agencies, ending breed discrimination, and a wide range of other animal issues. She now lives in Chatham, New York with her husband, 2 rescue thoroughbred racehorses, 2 rescue miniature donkeys, 4 rescue dogs, and 4 rescue cats. I think she's full. Okay, welcome, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, and hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Brian Posewitz, and I am involved with a group called Humane Voters Oregon. As Jennifer said, this is still sort of a side gig for me. I have a regular full-time job in addition to this, but I'm very passionate about animal welfare issues. And so the title of this talk is Electing Representatives who Represent Animals. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the organization we formed that I just mentioned called Humane Voters Oregon that would help do this, that is, elect representatives who represent animals. And I'm going to talk about just some of the activities that we engage in to try to influence the electoral process, and also just some of the things we've learned about this issue along the way. But first of all, this is an animal law conference, and this up here is a talk about politics. So why are we talking about politics at an animal law conference? And the answer is pretty obvious, but I think it's sometimes lost, which is the laws that we litigate under on behalf of animals are, generally speaking, laws that are made by people who are elected at the end of a process that is political. Politics in general creates the laws. Politics can change the laws. Politics can give you a case, and politics can take a case away. And just to give you a couple of there's all kinds of examples, but just to give you a couple, in 2015, there was a law passed in Oregon that created a private claim for statutory nuisance to abate a long laundry list of what are essentially animal welfare crimes. And it allows any person who's living in the county or has a business in the county to bring that claim and to recover attorney fees if they win. And that law was passed largely with the advocacy of the Animal Legal Defense Fund. On the flip side, there was a law passed in 2016 that validated a decision by the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission and the decision by the commission took wolves off the state endangered species list, and there was a bill passed in 2016 that said we're going to validate that decision legislatively, and the whole idea was to undermine a court challenge to that decision that was underway. And whether that law is ultimately going to be effective or not, my understanding is it's still pending at the Court of Appeals, but it's an example of how politics and legislation can have a very big impact on our ability to represent animals in the legal process. Humane, with that sort of introduction, I guess, let me talk about Humane Voters Oregon and how we came about and why we formed. And it essentially grew out of a group of people who were volunteering to do animal welfare work primarily through the Humane Society of the United States. We were helping do legislative advocacy, that sort of thing. And what would happen is that after the legislature was done and the campaign season would roll around, the people that we worked with on animal welfare policy would come to us and say, hey, come on, I worked with you during the legislature. How about helping me with my campaign? Meaning, I want a campaign contribution. The way that HSUS was set up and the way that most nonprofits are set up, they're set up under a provision of the tax laws, which is Section 501c3, in order for their contributors to deduct their contributions on their taxes. And the law around that says if you're one of those organizations, you cannot do anything to support or oppose a political candidate. You can do some lobbying, but you can't do anything to support or oppose a candidate. So the people from HSUS said, hey, we really have to have an organization that can endorse candidates and contribute to candidate campaigns. And they eventually talked us into starting this new organization, which we formed an Oregon nonprofit corporation. We then got recognition from the IRS as tax exempt, but under Section 501c4. As a 501c4, we can raise money and give it to candidates. We can endorse candidates. We're free to do that. And so that's why we formed this organization. And we decided early on that we can't just do contributions and endorsements, that we have to also show up when the policy decisions are being made, just to help people connect the dots. Hey, remember us? We helped your campaign. Will you help us on this issue? So that was basically the idea and the genesis. And that picture is after it was not even the first board meeting. It was what they call the meeting of incorporators. And that's me in the middle, obviously. And to the right is a woman named Emily Ayu. And to the left is Rachel Perman, who was our initial president, and she's part of the family that owns the Tofurky company out in Hood River. So what did we do in our first year? We sent out a bunch of questionnaires to candidates that were running for the legislature, asked them how they felt about different animal welfare issues. We made a handful of endorsements based on the answers to our questionnaire. We held some fundraisers to help the candidates we liked. That picture there is from a fundraiser we co-hosted for our endorsed candidate for governor, John Kitzhaber, and he was elected governor. As many of you know, he had some problems down the road with some issues unrelated to animal welfare, but we thought he was really good on those issues anyway, so we helped him with a fundraiser. Then we participated in the legislative process in 2015, and after that, we created what we called our legislative scorecard, which is, there's just a piece of that scorecard up there, and basically what we do is we list across the top the handful of bills that related to animal welfare that got voted on by the legislature, and we show how all the different legislators voted on those issues, and then we score them based on their votes. So what are we doing today? Pretty much the same thing. I'm not going to go through each item on this bullet list because I don't want to run out of time. But our functions are essentially to help candidates we like with their campaigns, to advocate for animal welfare policies, to inform people both on who we think they should vote for and opportunities to get involved when policies are being made. And for the time being, we are entirely a state and local organization, and Jennifer over here is one of our board members along with me, and Raj Reddy, who you heard from yesterday, is on the board, and Priscilla Rader, who many of you know is also on our board. Just to give you a couple of pictures, here we are testifying on an animal bill in 2017. In 2017, we also co-sponsored what we call Humane Lobby Day. That's where we get people who care about animal welfare to come down to the Capitol for a day, and we set up meetings with their elected representative and senator. We have some talks in the morning to tell them about the animal welfare bills that are pending and what we want them to say to their elected representatives, and then they go off and talk to their representative and senator about those issues. As you can imagine, it's logistically really hard to coordinate, and we actually were not able to pull it off in this last legislative session, but we'll definitely do so in the future. We continue to do endorsements, which we put on our website, and now they're based on a combination of we still do the questionnaires to get candidate responses to animal welfare issues we raise, and it's usually short, 4 or 5 questions. A lot of them we just know because we've worked with them, and we do some interviews and that kind of thing as well to make our endorsement decisions. And then we continue to raise money and contribute to the campaigns of the candidates that we like. We continue to host fundraisers. This is a fundraiser we co-hosted for Governor Kate Brown, and she's admittedly a mixed bag on animal welfare issues, but we think it's still a really important relationship to have. We continue to publish our voting records, and this is these are pieces basically of our voting record from the last legislative session, 2019, and just wanted to say a few things about this. So again, the concept is that across the top are the bills that related to animal welfare in the last legislative session. Then the scorecard's got a description of what those bills were, and then we show how all the legislators voted on those. Basically, green is good, red is bad, yellow is usually they didn't show up for a vote. And there's a couple of caveats on this. We can only score the issues that actually made it all the way to a vote of the full House or the full Senate. Those tend to be the more popular issues, the things that are pretty easy to vote yes for. And so to some extent, these voter scorecards make people look better than they might actually be. One of the things we've done to try to address that, I don't know if you can see it, but on the far right, we now do an other column where we basically reflect what people did behind the scenes. Were they a chief sponsor of a priority bill? They get a green box for that. Were they the vote that prevented a good bill from moving forward out of committee? We give them a red box for that. And so the scorecard is at least effective, I think, at distinguishing the true heroes who have green all the way across the board and get 100%, and the villains who have, honestly, if you've got a red box, you're probably not that great on animal welfare issues. And the scorecard, we think, is also a really helpful way to create just a really brief summary. I think this is our 4th one now of the bills that got voted on in the legislature each session. And I actually can't read the descriptions on the screen that's in front of me here, but just to give a couple of examples, On the top line there, if my memory serves me correctly, there was a bill that passed that said, if you get treatment for an animal that's been abused, you have a cause of action, a legal cause of action against the person who committed the abuse to recover the costs of that veterinary care. About halfway down, there was a bill that banned these things called M44s, it's basically a predator control device that's got a bait capsule that an animal bites, and it shoots a blast of cyanide poison at them and kills them. And that bill actually went through fairly easily, given that it's been really controversial in the past. And I think in part because there's a lot of evidence now that these things are not only inhumane for the targeted predators, but that they're catching a lot of unintended victims too, such as pets. Another important bill, second from the bottom there, we worked really hard on a bill to ban coyote killing contests. Believe it or not, they have contests in the state sponsored by reputable organizations and businesses to see who can kill the most coyotes in a weekend or something like that, and then they award prizes for that. We found that inhumane and inconsistent with any principles of fair chase and glorified killing for killing's sake. That bill passed the Senate, became very controversial as a symbol of this rural-urban divide and urbanites trying to tell rural people how to live and so forth. And we had the votes to pass it in the House, and it just got hung up at the end in a bunch of politicking at the end of the session where the Republicans walked out of the Senate to prevent some votes on some other things that they didn't like. And to bring them back, our understanding is part of the deal was to kill that coyote contest bill. So the legislative scorecards, we think, help inform voters, keep track of who's good and who's bad, raise the profile of animal welfare issues, and we put them on our website, but we find they're also getting picked up in other places that help tell people how to vote, like the Ballotpedia site mentions our humane scorecards. We have other ways of connecting with candidates and elected officials. This is a picture from a fly-in where they brought a bunch of rescue dogs from Texas because there was a bunch of flooding going on. They needed more room in the shelters, and so they flew a bunch of these dogs up to Oregon for adoption out of the shelters here. And we made somewhat of a political event out of that, invited local elected officials. The person in the picture there is Representative Janine Solman. She's a state representative from Hillsborough. And she showed up, and here she is unloading a shelter dog from an airplane, and she's a great animal welfare advocate in the legislature. We do education and outreach just to try to tell people about good candidates, bad candidates, what issues are going on in the legislature. That's me and Hauge tabling at VegFest a couple years ago. And what are just a few of the substantive type issues we've worked on lately? I sort of break them into the categories of companion animals, wildlife, and farm animals. On the companion animal front, we helped pass a bill a few years ago that allows a private person to break in to a car to rescue an animal in distress without getting civil or criminal liability for that. There's some sideboards, but it's basically designed to help address the dog in the hot car situation. We tried to pass a bill a few years ago to prohibit the declawing of cats and the debarking of dogs. That bill basically turned into a big fight over how many exceptions there should be, and as a result, it kind of cratered, and we were in the camp of there shouldn't be any exceptions. We've worked on bills that promote pet adoption as opposed to purchasing, particularly from puppy mill type operations, including a bill that would declare the rescue dog and the rescue cat the official state pet of Oregon, which may sound trivial, but we think it would actually help promote pet adoption, and it's been done in some other states, and we just haven't quite got enough traction to get that through. There's been a lot of good advancements on the wildlife front. I think Danielle will talk some more about that. A lot of legislation to increase the penalties for poaching. This last session required the state to do a wildlife corridor study, and part of that will be to try to improve wildlife highway crossings with like overpasses and underpasses, that kind of things. Coyote killing contests I talked about. Farm animals, a bill passed in the last session to require all egg-laying hens to be cage-free by, I think, 2024. And we've been part of a coalition of groups working to stop new and expanded mega dairies in Oregon, and this coalition of environmental groups, animal welfare groups, and family farm groups, it rose up around this new dairy in eastern Oregon called Lost Valley Farm out by a town called Boardman. It started out with 10,000 cows and was going to grow to 30,000 cows, right in the same neighborhood as an existing dairy called 3 Mile Canyon Farms, which is soon to be the biggest dairy in the country. And by the way, all of that is feeding into the Tillamook Creamery Association processing plant out there. It's all to make Tillamook dairy products, which, and some of you may know, there is a lawsuit now filed saying they misrepresent their product as coming from small-scale family dairies when in fact they don't. But that dairy, Lost Valley Farm, we were able to, I think, throw a lot of sand in the gears, and for that and other reasons it shut down and went bankrupt, but there's a new owner that may try to put a new dairy at the same location. And that picture is a picture I took. I actually was on the property when they were talking about auctioning off the cows and people could go look at them, and I went out there and took some pictures and looked around. And one thing I'll tell you is the stench is just overwhelming. And I got out of my car and I could barely breathe. Back to the original question. What are we doing? Are we helping elect candidates that represent animals? I think based on our experience so far, I have to qualify that a little bit. The reality is that if we just talk about the state legislature, for example, there's 60 representatives and 30 senators. Very few of them get challenged in their own primary. So if you're a Democrat, it's very unlikely that another Democrat's going to run against you in your primary. And in most districts, it's really clear that either the Democrat's going to win or the Republican is going to win. And so what that means is that most of these legislative races are pretty well determined in advance, and there's really only maybe 5 to 10 races every election cycle that are going to be close. And those attract hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's pretty hard for a still fairly new and small organization to influence that. That said, we think that our contributions and our endorsements are really important, more so to build relationships with the people who are going to get elected, probably going to get elected anyway, to build goodwill, to get them to know us, to get them to listen to us, to raise the profile of animal welfare issues. We think it's really important to do that. And doing it through a political action committee with a name like Humane Voters Oregon tells them when they look at their list of contributors, this came from people who care about animal welfare. And also campaign money, we've learned, tends to travel around. If we give money to our best advocates, even if they're going to win anyway, they'll funnel that money into the priority campaigns of their party, which gives them more influence within their party in terms of getting committee chairmanships, things like that. So just a couple of quick conclusions. Politics is a critical part of improving conditions for animals, because politics is what leads to the laws that we use to protect animals. I would say it's sometimes a dirty game, and I go to all these fundraisers. There's literally a couple every week when they're not in session, and you go meet the candidates and you chit chat and there's food and drink. But when you walk in the door, there's a big basket there, and everybody is dropping an envelope of money in the basket. And it does feel, sometimes a little sleazy, but it's part of the process, and we think that animals need to be involved in that part of the process as well. And so that's why we're doing this. And thank you very much.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me? I'm generally pretty loud, so it shouldn't be a problem. Again, I'm Danielle Moser. I'm the Wildlife Program Coordinator for Oregon Wild. Oregon Wild is a state-based conservation organization dedicated to protecting the state's wildlands, wildlife, and waters as an enduring legacy for future generations. So the one caveat right off the bat is my focus is exclusively wildlife. So we care about all animals, but my focus is wildlife. So I want folks to know that. So the lens through which I'm going to be speaking, my interactions in the legislature are all through the wildlife focus. I also want to say that in my experience, and I feel like Brian can speak to this more, folks, especially in the legislature, who might be champions on companion animals or farm animals aren't necessarily champions on wildlife. Wildlife does get a different, I don't know, just lens through by which people see wildlife. So those who might be so gung-ho and love their dogs and their cats, or really trying to change our farming practices, see wildlife as just this kind of like, well, that's wild in nature, and have a different approach to protection and recovery. So anyway, so that's the just quick caveat about my presentation. So I wanted folks to be aware. I guess the other caveat, or the other thing I would say is my focus is mostly at the state level. I think Brian, I don't know if you said that, but his is as well. So, we work a little bit with members of Congress, and I am working pretty diligently on trying to stop rollbacks to the Endangered Species Act, and I do pay attention to things happening federally, but my focus and my presentation are all going to be in the state legislature. So my focus will be about what happens once they're elected and they're in the legislature or in positions of decision-making power. How do we get victories for animals at that point? So I won't dwell on it too much, but I kind of want to say what Brian said. In this ideal world, if you have a 501c4 and an accompanying PAC, you would be able to, from the get-go, identify candidates, cultivate those you would know the candidates before they even know they want to be candidates. You would be able to identify these animal and wildlife champions well before they've even thought about maybe running for office. You could work with them, cultivate, support them as they're running for office, bolster their work once they're in the legislature. So this is like the ideal world. That's where you would start these relationships from the get-go. And I should also say, so Oregon Wild, we do have an accompanying C4 and PAC. It's the Oregon Wild Conservation Leaders Fund. So I do sort of play in the electoral space a bit. It's not the most well-funded PAC that we have, but so I do dabble a bit. And pictures of the folks up there, and I'll talk about it more. It's just some of our champions that we've supported in different ways. Representative Pam Marsh, Representative David Gomberg, Representative Tana Sanchez, Representative Ken Helm, and then the other person is Mary Wall. She's a Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commissioner, and I'm going to talk about that commission in a minute because it's vitally important for wildlife. So as Brian said, and sorry to repeat a lot, but it is, playing politics. This is what matters. This is where all of these decisions get made. This is, as much as I have a very love-hate relationship with this process, it's important to be engaged in it because this is where it matters. So just so we're all on the same page, at least as it pertains to wildlife, these are the really key decision-making bodies that are determining what's happening for wildlife. So the governor, well, I should say the executive branch, because that's the body, but the governor, obviously, she can determine her vision for the state around animal welfare and wildlife. She can guide the legislature toward that. She obviously has veto power and potentially has a lot of influence over legislation that's being introduced in the legislature. So that's obviously one. And these aren't necessarily ranked in order, but I do want to emphasize this Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission. It's not, I feel like only for those of us who are advocates who are kind of deeply involved in the process really play in that space. But if you care about wildlife, that's really where so much wildlife policy is made. So this is the decision-making body that oversees the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. So everything from hunting seasons, fishing seasons, how many bear tags are we going to allocate this year to kill, for the spring bear hunt? So things like that, that's kind of what it's known for historically. But this is also the decision-making body to say whether a particular species should be listed on the state endangered species list, whether it should be taken off a list. What are we doing about salmon runs? All a variety of things. The cougar management plan, the wolf conservation and management plan. So just about every decision related to wildlife comes through that body. So that's an important one. And the legislature actually has a role in that, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then in the legislature, these, you have House committees, you have Senate committees, and who's on that leadership, who chairs these committees, these are all important. So again, through a wildlife lens, on the Senate side, you have Environment and Natural Resources, that's the committee mostly taking up wildlife issues. Judiciary, that's the coyote killing contest bill. We put that through Judiciary because it was a more friendly committee, and we thought there would be an easier time getting that through. And then the Rules Committee, it's a little obscure, but the Rules Committee oversees all of the governor's appointments to boards and commissions. So they are figuring out and determining who should be on that Fish and Wildlife Commission. And then on the House side, again, you have agriculture and land use, you have energy and environment, natural resources. So these are all committees that different animal welfare and wildlife laws could be coming through, so that we have to pay attention to. How overwhelming is that? So if you remember your Schoolhouse Rock song, which I don't remember the lyrics at all, but I imagine they touched on some of this legislative process. But I think it's really important because as we're talking about, how do you cultivate these champions? How do you get wildlife victories? I think it's important to know generally how a bill becomes a law, because this is pretty accurate. And sorry you can't see it perfectly, but it does talk about, a concerned citizen or group, talks to a legislator about an idea, then it gets introduced and the bill's drafted, and then it's, determined does it go to the House side or the Senate side, and then you have your first reading, and anyway, you can see the whole thing. But I showcase this to say, there's a lot of places for things to be traded away, for bills to be eroded, for influence, for opposition, for support, there's just so many different places to really influence this process. And so that can be good and that can be challenging. So it's to understand, and maybe you feel frustrated too by the legislative process, like, why don't we see more bills or better bills? I mean, that to me showcases why it's really hard actually to get things through. So yeah, I wanted just to show that so we're all on the same page. Furthermore, and here in Oregon, we also have a little bit of polluted by money. We'll just say what it is. So in Oregon, and you can see some of these stats, and if you haven't read the Oregonians series, Polluted by Money, I highly recommend it, by Rob Davis, because this matters. This is a huge reason why we have sometimes some major roadblocks when it comes to animal welfare, wildlife, definitely when on our wildlands work, trying to reform forest practices for Oregon Wild, this is a huge issue. But Oregon is one of 11 states that allow people to give as much as they want to political candidates, which, I don't know, maybe you're like, well, that's okay. But one of 7 also allow corporations to give money. One of 5, we have no limits at all on corporate giving. So per capita, when it comes to corporate giving, Oregon ranks number 1. So we have a lot of corporate influence in our political system. And we see that play out. We absolutely see that play out when it comes to the Farm Bureau, the Cattlemen's Association, timber industry, the Koch brothers funding things because they can donate to politicians in Oregon without limits. They funnel it to other companies or entities to give dollars to the political process. So that matters a lot. That influences a lot. And it's just, again, another hurdle that we have to navigate and work through. So it's not all dire, it's not all negative. And I want to go into the sort of the seeds of change and how do we overcome that? And it is possible. And so, like I said, in this ideal world, you would be identifying these candidates, cultivating them, getting these champions so that when they get to the legislature, you have this person or these people that are ready to fight for these issues that we care about. That's not always possible. So what does it look like if maybe you can't do that? Maybe you don't have a PAC, you don't have a C4, or you don't have a big, you don't work for an organization that has a big PAC and can really play in the election space. So, to what Brian said as well, engagement is key. So this is what it looks like for those of us who are doing advocacy, trying to work with legislators once they're there. It's about collaboration, communication, staying engaged, being a resource for people, feeling like you are a reliable ally, that you can bring validators and other support, you can give them constituent support, and just really making them feel that as they're championing these issues, they have the support of their community and of other networks. I think, like he was showcasing with that Humane Lobby Day, we also do a Wildlife Lobby Day. It's important, if you're not involved in the process, they're not going to feel bad if they're dismissing the issues you're trying to advocate for. So I think having a presence and staying engaged, we did, you can see there's a training for our Wildlife Lobby Day and some of our activists meeting with Representative Marty Wilde, and it's important. I mean, I think that drumbeat, having that grassroots support, I have to brag on Oregon Wild for a minute. We have a really great communications shop in our organization, so we're really good. We have a lot of connections with reporters, and so we are able to drum up a lot of media coverage around things. Legislators like that or don't like that, depending on what story you're trying to tell. So all of these things, I think, are what really help once you're in this process to get things across the finish line. And the other thing I would say, so that's kind of the positive, like here's how to engage with these legislators and really get them to carry forward policies on these issues we care about. I would say the counter to that, or at least the accompanying thing, is accountability. And Oregon Wild is very good at this part, I would say. And it's kind of the carrot and the stick situation. And we hope to not be doing this with who we see our champions, but for those who are complicit or even enablers of bad policy, we think it's really important to hold their feet to the fire on that. And I think that's an important piece to being taken seriously in the legislative process. My boss has this little political cartoon on his door, and it says, bite first so that when you bark, they believe you. And I don't know if I 100% agree with that, but the concept is, you need to show that you have this strength so that when you are later on down the road, saying, hey, this is a bad policy, or hey, you're screwing up on this, they'll believe you that you're going to actually, go to the media or hold them accountable to that. So I think that's an important piece so that folks who are doing bad things as it relates to animal welfare aren't just sliding by and, going on with their day and not feeling how the public, doesn't agree with that. So I do think that's an important piece that not everybody does, and in our case anyway, it's worked to make sure and to be taken seriously in playing politics, quite honestly. And in doing that, we have seen some wildlife victories, or again, my lens is wildlife. But so in terms of the kind of holding people accountable for bad decisions, I would showcase this first one. The Senate Rules Committee chair rejects the governor's controversial nomination. So the backstory with that is, again, I'm talking about this Fish and Wildlife Commission. The process is the governor appoints candidates to this commission, and then the Senate has to approve them. And, we don't expect of this seven-person body that every candidate is going to be amazing on wildlife protection. We get that. However, from Oregon Wild's perspective, we've always advocated for not having people so rife with conflict of interest being on this commission, and who generally have a respect for science and understand their role as a commissioner. So long story short, the governor proposed this person, James Nash, who is the son of the most anti-wolf advocate for the Cattlemen's Association. And coincidentally, the first thing out of the gate that the commission would be voting on was the updated wolf plan. And so, we had met with the governor, and then that was one of her candidates, and we just were like, what gives? This is ridiculous. And then on top of which, he had lots of photos all over his social media feed of trophy hunting all over the world. In East Africa, he had a picture of him holding up 5 coyotes. 5 coyotes at once, because I think he participated in one of these killing contests. So really, at least, as we're heading into a more humane society, we want policies that reflect our humane values, wildlife management policies that are changing as we are further into the 21st century. That just did not represent that to us. And so Oregon Wild, with the Humane Society and other organizations, really pulled out that accountability piece, that tactic, and we got a lot of media coverage, and we advocated hard to the Senate that that person should not be considered for the commission. So he didn't get put on the commission, and you can see the coverage, and it's saying exactly what I'm talking about as a tactic, that the conservation groups just really pulled out all stops, and so we won on that, which was great. And then on the other side on that, like how to engage with champions and build those relationships over time and then ultimately get victories for wildlife, that's, I'm gonna highlight what Brian mentioned, this M44 ban bill. So again, this is just like this spring-loaded device that used to be put all over the landscape, specifically targeting coyotes, but because it's just put out on the landscape, I mean, anything that can pull up on it can get cyanide gas poisoning and die. We've had an endangered wolf die from one of these. We've had bald eagles, foxes, obviously lots of people's dogs. And then pretty recently, 2017, there was a kid that was going to try to protect his dog, save his dog in Idaho, and he got blasted with cyanide gas and got poisoned, and it's just horrible. And so, we've been trying to ban these around the country, and so we worked with some of our champions in the legislature and ultimately got a ban this year. So thank you. So that was great. So that's the picture with the governor. And again, that was part of our Wildlife Lobbying Day platform of issues that we were bringing forth. We had those relationships. We worked hard. We had grassroots support, sending action alerts and having their constituents call and show support. And that helped really carry it across the finish line. So you can see kind of, again, in playing politics, there's different ways to go about it, but I think to what Brian said as well, it's all about having those relationships and really being engaged in the process, both so that they feel like you're an ally and a resource and a collaborator, but also for those who aren't so friendly, knowing that, you're gonna hold their feet to the fire if they're doing things that really erode protections for animals. So I think that's what I've learned in my time in Salem and working in the legislature. So thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I kind of feel like the villain here. I'm the politician, and I've kind of been categorized as a bit of a villain. So give me 20 minutes to tell you about, first I thought the story of how I got elected, and then what I've learned in 18 years, and how I think we can get more animal-friendly legislators in the legislature. So my dad was a big politician. He was a Republican in New York. He was a buddy of Nelson Rockefeller. My whole family were Rockefeller Republicans. You grew up that way. But I kind of went my own path kind of quickly. So I was fighting against the Shoreham nuclear power plant. I was out on the east end of Long Island when Union Carbide was using Aldicarb or Temec, if you remember that, in the potatoes. And so when we would have dinner at night and I'd be a little late for dinner, my dad would look around and say, "Has anybody seen the Pinko Communist today?" It's like, "Thanks, Dad." So the Pinko Communists decided to run for election. And I was not going to diss my family. We'd been Republicans for eons, so I ran as a Republican. And I ran in a district that was at least 52% unaffiliated voters, and it turned out that there was a Democrat running who was the fire chief. He was supposed to win. And then there was a newspaper reporter that decided to run as a libertarian, and I am an economics professor and was running as the Republican. Well, I won by 34 votes. So I thought, yay, I've got this mandate. I'm going to go to Hartford and change the world. So I go up to Hartford, and I knew what I wanted to do. My expertise is environmental policy, and I wanted to work on the environment, but I also was incredibly, incredibly moved by animal policy, animal cruelty. I rode on the United States equestrian team. I galloped racehorses undercover to find out what kind of drugs they were using. I was able to keep New York State from using bute and Lasix for 2 years by a master's thesis. And I would love to get back into that because I know what goes on and I know what the problems are. So you're in Hartford, how do you do environmental policy? Do you hug trees? Yeah, right, that's going to get you where? No place. But using economics to tell people the positive economics of environmental policy, that works. So what about animal cruelty? If I come in and I say, animal cruelty is an act of violence, and they're like, yeah, okay. No, animal cruelty is an act of violence. They'll be, yeah. So what could I find that would resonate? Well, guess what? Animal cruelty is a huge indicator for future violent behavior. Huge. Child abuse, domestic violence, school shooters. Now I've got your attention, don't I? And I've got your attention whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, a Green, a Libertarian, I don't care who you are, because when I start talking about children, and I start talking about domestic violence, and I start talking about animal cruelty, you start to listen. So then the first thing I did with my huge mandate was start down this path, and as I said the other day, I wanted to ban bullhooks for elephants. That went great. They were real pleased with that one. But I kept at it. And as I was keeping at it, I was doing some other legislation, dissection choice, cross-reporting of animal cruelty, and I'll get to that. But what the big thing was is I said, what's going on with the data? I'm an economist. I want to make some decisions by data. So I called Judiciary. I said, give me 10 years of the animal cruelty stats in the state of Connecticut. Who was convicted, who was arrested, they said, what? I said, 10 years of animal cruelty stats in Connecticut. They said, oh no, well we purge those. I said, what? They said, we purge that data. I said, what? You don't archive it? No, Representative, I'm sorry, we do not archive it. I said, well, guess what? You're going to start. So in 2002, they started archiving the data. So we were able to establish a baseline. And the baseline indicated that we were getting convictions in about 18% of animal cruelty cases. The rest of those were either nollied. Now I know we have a lot of lawyers here, so I'm assuming you know nollied, meaning in the state of Connecticut that if they didn't pursue it further after a year, it was dismissed. In another a significant percentage, they were given what's called a diversionary program. It's called, and within that diversionary program, once you go through it, your record is expunged. It's called accelerated rehabilitation. So if you did something, we say, okay, you get AR, once you, and the things that they have you do are absurd. You have to call into your parole officer once a week or something. Then your record's expunged. No one ever knows that you did it. So we were able to establish these baselines and these numbers, which then gave me something to actually go to people with and said, do you care about domestic violence? Do you care about child abuse? Do you care about school shooters? So then the story takes a little bit different trend. I ran unopposed. After winning by 34 votes, I ran unopposed. I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. Then I ran unopposed again. But what was happening too was I was doing a lot of work with the Democrats. My dad's, words came back. I could hear it. There she goes again. It's that pinko communist. You can't control her. I was doing work on the economics of the Study 6, power plants in Connecticut that we needed to shut down, and the industry said they couldn't do it. So I did the economics. I said, yeah, you can. They said, well, your numbers are wrong. I said, so give me yours. Oh, no, those are priority numbers. I said, well, then I guess my numbers hold now, don't they? So we did it. A couple other issues I worked with the D's on, and then I said, you know what? I'm switching parties. So I was the first person in the state of Connecticut to switch parties as a sitting legislator. So you can assume that the Republicans decided, okay, now we're going to get her. That is enough. We've had it. She's worked across the aisle. Now she's switching parties. And the Democrats immediately made me a vice chair. I was vice chair of government administration elections, so that really, really irritated the Republicans. So they ran against me, and I won with 68% of the vote. And from there on in, I ran unopposed. You find somebody in this country that's run unopposed as a Republican and unopposed as a Democrat. So it's like, Yeah, do I want to pat myself on the back and say, yeah, you are so cool? No, what I want to say is why? What was it that made me be able to run unopposed as a Democrat and a Republican? I'll tell you exactly what it was. It was the issue of children and animal cruelty and the safety of families, because I became known for those issues. Animal cruelty, domestic violence. Let's take a quick look at school shooters. Do you guys realize, depending upon how you do the data, and as you know, you can parse the data a million ways, and if you're a statistician, you know, you get what you can make the thing say. But regardless, it's at least 50% of school shooters started with animal cruelty. And I can take a period of time where 7 school shooters, every single one of them started with animal cruelty. Columbine, animal cruelty. You want to go a little bit more current? Devlin Kelly, Texas, 2017, 17 people in a church, 12 of those were children. In 2014, he was in Colorado Springs in a trailer park. He was caught beating the hell out of a dog on its head, on its back, slamming it into the ground, dragged it off. You know what happened? The cops gave him a fine. That's 2014. What if somebody had said, that's an indicator that this guy is dangerous? We need to do something. I can go through lists with you. Kip Kinkle killed his parents, went to Thurston High School and killed 12. He started by putting firecrackers in his cat's mouth and watching them explode. Pearl High School shooter Luke Woodham tortured his own dog to death by putting him in a plastic bag and lighting him on fire. He killed his mom and then went to school and killed 2 more. Let's go to Parkland. God bless those kids in Parkland. And I hope that they keep doing exactly what they're doing. Nicholas Cruz, he was known for shooting squirrels and messing around with them, with going to his neighbors who had baby pot-bellied pigs and trying to kill them. They were called innumerable times on the things that he was doing. Nobody took it seriously. And I'll tell you something else that really annoys me. If you look at reports on this, nobody wants to talk about it. Mother Jones magazine, which I love, because they're able to do deep investigative reporting, just did a big article on domestic violence. There was not one mention of animal cruelty. So guess who's getting in touch with them? Maybe. So this issue is a nonpartisan issue. And I call it, when I'm working with other legislators, I call it a gateway issue, because if I can get you to care about this, then eventually I can expand it to get you to care about all animals. Because what do I really feel? I really feel it's an act of violence. It is clearly an act of violence. But if I have to link it to child abuse, to domestic violence, and to school shooters to get your attention and to help some of these issues from happening, then that's where I'm going to start. Legislators tend to want to get reelected. That's really what they focus on. So sometimes they're a little scared of getting out on issues. Sometimes they don't want to be too controversial. But this issue is what I call a positive sum game. There is no downside. There is no danger if you're a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian to say that you want to save children, that you want to save families, and guess what? It also involves saving animals. Working with my colleagues, are you guys putting up the loop? Okay, they're going to put up a loop on Desmond's Army. Desmond's Army stood side by side with me and fought this fight. They came to me 2013, I think, and they said, can we do this? Can you do something like this? And I said, yeah, like, are you guys crazy? You want me to get lawyers in court for animals? What? Seriously? How am I supposed to do that? Nobody in the world has done it, guys. So this is just going to loop through. There might be questions at the end that you have, but I'm not speaking to it. I'm just letting it loop through. But to let you know that Desmond's Army is still viable, they're out there every day. There were brochures that I put out. I didn't have enough with me, but so share. And these people really were absolutely amazing as we brought this forward. They learned how to lobby. And you know what the thing here to me that's really, really special about this is these are lay people. And lay people are oftentimes, they really want to participate. They want to do something meaningful. Well, as you're watching this, these gals go to court, and guys, and they wear their purple shirts. And the purple shirt is because the last thing that Desmond got was a purple leash, was the last act of love for Desmond. And you'll read his story as you go along here. But without Desmond's Army, without them being willing to do this 3 sessions, we fought to have this done. And 3 sessions of convincing my colleagues that they were not going to lose because they voted for Desmond's Law. The best part of this for my colleagues was that it was at no cost to the state. So there was no cost, and UConn law students were involved, and UConn loved it. And Jessica Rubin, who I think has presented here before, was an incredible, incredible partner also. So it was this ability to convince legislators that this was not a bad thing, this was an amazingly good thing. The other thing is we didn't want to be first, right? We'll be first, oh help. So that was another thing we had to get through, but we're first. Maine has passed it, they're waiting for the governor's signature, and as Jennifer said, I am so excited to be working for the Animal Legal Defense Fund because they bring their heft to this issue, and we have got at least 8 states that I know of right now that are interested. At least 5 have already introduced it once. But you have to keep at it. It's an educational issue. One thing I would say, sometimes people are not exactly ready to go this far in the legislature. It's a bridge that needs to be built. And one other law that I did that has worked out really well is a cross-reporting bill between Department of Agriculture and Department of Children and Families. I'm not talking about mandated reporters. I'm talking about 2 departments actually talking to each other. How this works in Connecticut is that Department of Agriculture goes to a home where there is a case of animal abuse. They see that there are children in that home. They write up a report and give it to the Department of Children and Families. Department of Children and Families looks it up to see if there is an open investigation or whether there's ever been an investigation or ever been complaints. And if there have, they go. And to date, we've saved 17 children that we never would have known about. The flip of that is when the DCF workers go to their homes to be working with the children and they see an animal that looks like there's a problem, they write up a report for Department of Agriculture. And in what I have referred to as a Christmas miracle, they both use the exact same report to report to each other. So not only has this saved children, but it is breaking down silos, which you will hear all the time when you're in government, that we're siloed, we never talk to each other. The really exciting part of this was when we did our first workshop with the animal control officers and the DCF workers, they couldn't stop talking to each other because they were so amazingly gratified that they would be able to do something. We had DCF workers who would say, it broke my heart. I would go to the home and I'd be trying to work with the kids and I'd see this dog that was in terrible condition and it wasn't my place to do anything. We'd have ACOs that would say, I go to the home to see this dog and I know I'd see the kid with dirty diapers and, walking around looking terribly thin, and it wasn't my place to actually do something. So this ability to cross-report made a huge difference in how they felt about their job, how they felt about how they related to what was going on, and what was their place. You know, am I the faceless bureaucrat, or am I somebody who can really make a difference so that you are able to empower people? As far as Desmond's Law goes, we've had 60 cases that have been adjudicated, and I will tell you that the animal cruelty that is really dangerous is what they call up close and personal. And we just had a case. I was called 2 days ago, and I think people know that we could only do dogs and cats. I had to give up something in this bill. But guess what? We had a judge ask in a case of abuse to bunnies for an animal advocate. And the judge can get whatever the judge wants. So we moved into representing bunnies. So it's growing by itself because the judges are accepting it and they're using it. The most recent case, and I hate to be grisly with you guys, but you know, you've heard stuff. Kid was driving erratically, 25 years old. We just got this 2 days ago. The police pull him over. He had a bunny that he had already cut off their genitalia and was in the process of cutting off his legs while driving. And the police officer said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I hate rabbits." And it turns out that he had been to this pet store before buying small animals. He is a potential mass killer, and he needs to be helped, really, but we certainly need to recognize what we're dealing with there. And he is now in a psychiatric hospital, and it looks like there will be an animal advocate. We're trying to figure out how do we take care of this particular person. I would also say to you, in accelerated rehabilitation, we had somebody that got accelerated rehabilitation whose dogs were in horrific condition. So his record is erased. Guess what he does? He's a nurse. Wouldn't you want to know if your nurse had done that to the dogs? So let me just end by saying, and I always say this when I'm doing a speech like this, when I think about the children that might have been saved had we been paying attention, it haunts me. And I was at Sandy Hook. I was the committee chair of children, and I spoke to every single one of those parents. It haunts me. And what I do say at the end is, come, join me, fight on the side of the angels. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of our presenters. I think this was a fantastic way to start the morning. Maybe I'm just a policy nerd, but I feel really fired up and I'm excited about all the great work that's being done, not only locally here in Oregon, but across the nation with so many fresh ideas to save animals and use statute as a way to come at some of these problems that sets up our litigators or our criminal justice partners to do the work that they do as well. So I'm waiting for the mad rush to come to the microphones because now's the time to ask questions of the things that it's stimulated you. And I think we have at least 10 minutes, so go ahead.
Hi, my name's Natasha. I'm a 1L at Lewis and Clark. I had a question for Diana Urban. So it was kind of hinted at in your talk about how the police don't really convict or even try to get help for these people who abuse animals. So I was wondering if there's any steps that you've been taking or if there's any possible steps to take to try to train police officers, and also the problem with police officers in recent studies also being domestic abusers themselves, and how we can kind of, I guess, get that gap a little bit closer to being closed.
Yeah, you know, Desmond's Law has done something amazing in that area, and it's not only police officers, it's animal control officers. Because they now have a voice in court, because they now realize that what they're doing actually makes a difference, we do have police officers starting to step up and animal control officers starting to step up. But in talking with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, we realize that there does need to be training. There is no question about it, there needs to be training. And we need to emphasize the seriousness, and it's not just the police, it's the judges and our animal control officers. So it evolves. This law is evolving, and each and every time we have a new case, we realize some other area where we could be more effective. But you're absolutely right. And we're doing data on this right now because it's been in effect since 2016, so we can get a smidgen of what's going on. But we know from being in the court how amazing the difference is. And listening to the police officers now realize that if they miss something, there are people looking now. And the ACO is going to talk up, the animal control officer is going to talk up. So yeah, it's constantly evolving.
It's good to know that there's some accountability coming up, so thank you.
Over here.
Hi. My question is kind of general. I'm a millennial, so I grew up being raised to be a dreamer and then entered a marketplace that was not exactly what I imagined. And so hearing about being exposed, I guess, to conversations about legislation and politics kind of triggers that dreamer in me, like, oh, I can make a difference somewhere. And so I'm wondering if you have any experience or advice that you can give to get young people involved, what you do to get young people involved, and then how that can kind of be translated. I'm a law student, so how I can kind of explain that to other students and show people that the legislative and political process is also a place where young dreamers can go to make a difference. Thanks.
Well, one thing, I'll start with this, but the Animal Legal Defense Fund does have chapters in law schools, which I highly recommend. But it discourages me sometimes because I think oftentimes we feel like we've given up, and you can't give up. I mentor girls, young women all the time, and it's incredibly important. And the more I go to law schools, I go any place that somebody will have me speak, and we need to believe that we can go forward. And in listening here, that's all about the money game. And there's a lot of truth to that. Connecticut is one of the one state in the United States that does campaign finance reform. I used to have to raise a ton of money. Now we get it from unclaimed property. I only have to raise a certain amount of money from a ton of donors to be sure that everybody's participating. But that's one huge area. If we could get to the campaign funding aspect of it, that would make a big difference because people feel discouraged. But you know what I always say, guys, I won by 34 votes. Don't you think I think about those 34 votes and who were they and why did they vote for me and the opportunity it gave me? So it is a very tough question. But I do think that we can get there if we continue to talk with each other and to educate. Don't get discouraged. I'm a huge cheerleader for this stuff, and then I go home, my husband's sitting over there, and I go, oh my God, we're totally screwed. And then he's like, now Diana. So I get it, and I think we need to put our heads together. I bet you guys know. I bet you know what it would take to make you feel like you can do it.
Yeah, so, should I go next? Okay. So as I understood the question, just basically what are some ways for younger people to get involved? And, I would say, I'm going to forget some things here, but, one thing you can do is just get on the email lists of the organizations that follow the policy making around animal welfare, including ours, Humane Voters Oregon, or Oregon Wild. That'll show you a lot of opportunities, to email your representatives and senators about an issue, to call them about an issue. That really helps a lot. Find out who your legislators are, representatives and senators. Get on their email list. It's really easy to do. Go to the Oregon Legislature website. You'll start getting notices about their open houses and coffee houses. Showing up at those and saying, I care about animal welfare. What are you doing on that front? Super helpful. And then, like I say, I'm forgetting things, but helping fund the political action committee that contributes to candidates is helpful too. And there's volunteer opportunities. A lot of it's not super glamorous. Like for us to be able to put a volunteer into a candidate's campaign to stuff envelopes or go door to door builds an incredible amount of goodwill. So those are just sort of top of my head.
And I would add, so at Oregon Wild, we also, and this is something I also run at our organization, we have an activist training program. We call it Wild Ones. And so folks come monthly and we do sort of skills training and advocacy through the lens of our campaigns we're working on. And so one of the things is to try to demystify the political process and how to get involved in policy, and so to what he's saying about like calling your legislator or writing comments or participating in a lobby day, what I'm doing is teaching the skills for how to do that so that folks do feel more comfortable engaging in the process, because I hear from people all the time, you get an email action alert and it's like, call the governor, and I know people think, oh my gosh, am I actually calling the governor, and like what do I get nervous about it. And so the goal of our Wild Ones program is to just try to get people engaged and involved in how to be an advocate and, like I said, demystifying that process. So if you're in the Portland area and you want to participate, we meet monthly at various locations, but you should sign up for Oregon Wild's email alerts, and I'll send out information. But I think that's one way, is to get involved in actually taking action on those things.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. You're up.
So I've worked in politics for 20 years and believe very firmly that we don't do politics well in animal rights. We just don't. I'm so pleased to see all of you up here. And I'm hoping that you, especially as a legislator, can talk a little bit, because we have a lot of students in here, about the importance of being able to write legislation, advise candidates, just generally be a political type attorney, and how much you've interfaced with groups who do that well, and what that looks like, because I think that the more we can encourage people to go into that area, the better off this is going to be.
Yeah, that was probably one thing that I forgot to say. I get going and I get so passionate about this, I go off, But I have no power without you. And that is the truth. It is the advocates, it's you that gives me the power. If I'm there all by myself making all these statements and stomping around, yeah, I can get a little ways because I threaten people, and I tell them I'm going to filibuster and talk about economics for 5 hours. I could do that. But I need you, because you're the ones that call the constituents. You're the ones that call the other legislators. You're the ones that give me the power to bring things on the floor. So is it important that you understand the law if my young lawyers are out there? Yeah, it is incredibly important. Do I interact with you? Absolutely. Do I think about how much it means to have you there? Yeah. And it's you, the young lawyers, because, guys, I'm getting old, and you guys have got to step up. I can't keep doing this. I need you to do this, and I need you to run for office. I need you to say, yeah, you know what, we're not going to let this fall apart, damn it. We're doing it. So let me say that one more time, and I mean it. You give me the power.
That's a great way to end. All right, thank you.